Welcome to Audiogyan with Kedar Nimkar, a podcast that documents insightful conversations with Indian designers, artists, musicians, writers, thinkers and creatives of all types. Catch us on iTunes or visit audiogyan.com for more Gyan sessions. Here's your host Kedar Nimkar.
Each frame, each moment, we record the world around us through our senses. We experience the warmth of light through the window, the dashing of the elevator's doors in our hallway, the texture of the handrail, the aroma of something cooking in the kitchen. In P.L.Deshpande's words, when we hear the word Thalipeeth, we not only just remember a peculiar Maharashtrian dish made by Grandmom or mom, but we also remember her bangles dangling while doving the flour, freshly made white butter, the kitchen where we sat and ate, and countless other memories. These senses create a full experience of spaces we inhabit. Rohan Shivkumar has been trying to capture these moments, cacophonies, their contradictions, paradoxes, and more through his architectural films. Today I have Rohan Shivkumar with us on Audiogyan. Rohan is an architect, urban designer, a filmmaker practicing in Mumbai. He's the Dean of Research and Academic Development at Kamla Raheja Vidyanidhi Institute of Architecture and Environmental Studies. His work ranges from architecture, urban design, urban research and consultancy projects to works in films and visual arts. He's interested in issues concerning housing, public spaces and exploring the many ways of reading and representing the city. Today we'll try and document what does it take to create space or a moment in time on a film. So thank you, Rohan, for giving your time, and it's a wonderful, it's really great honor to have you on Audiogyan.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Kedar. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks. And so basically I've come up with few questions, and obviously I'll leave it to you to maneuver the conversation because these are just broad pointers which I thought of. So to begin with, I would like to just ask you slightly longer question. You have made two films so far, from my understanding, Nostalgia of the Future and Lovely Villa. I recently watched both of them at Frame Conclave in Goa, and they were really nice. And from there, a lot of questions have stemmed up. In both of your films, you're trying to show connections or maybe disassociation between matter, if we call, which is architecture, and then the soul, which in case is memories or intangible feelings associated with it. So can you start by telling us briefly what these films are and what made you make these films?
So I teach architecture. That's my primary role as an architect. Mm-hmm. Although I do some bit of consultancy work and some sort of research work as well, my primary job that pays my bills is as a teacher. Mm-hmm. So I'm really interested in thinking about how does one conceive of architecture itself, or what is architecture, and theoretically and conceptually, and what is its relationship with the way that we structure our identities. So that is really where both Nostalgia for the Future as well as Lovely Villa begin. The first film, which Avijit Mukul Kishore, who's a cameraman and my co-director, him and I made together, was called Nostalgia for the Future, and we made that a few years back. It was really trying to discover how does architecture and film play a role in which our identities as Indian citizens are shaped. So that is what our general sort of idea was, because both architecture and documentary film have been deeply involved in the making of the Indian citizen. When the Indian state, the Films Division India, for whom we were making the film, was one of the organizations that was deeply involved in constructing who we were supposed to become as Indian citizens. Wow. And also architecture itself was enlisted as a discipline through which we could then make the spaces for that imagined Indian citizen. So, the famous story, of course, being with Nehru hiring Corbusier to design Chandigarh.
Yes.
So we thought that there was a certain way in which our idea of citizenship was shaped by both film as well as architecture. So we were really interested in looking at that idea of citizenship. Like, who is the citizen? What is the body of that citizen? And to do that, we decided to look at homes, because it is in the home which is the first sort of space that one imagines for a body. It was through the architecture of those homes that we would try and discover who were supposed to be the citizens that were supposed to inhabit those homes. So what we did in Nostalgia for the Future is that we looked at 4 distinct imaginations of homes built over a period of 100 years, and looked at the different ways in which each of them conceived of the body of the citizen. And we picked 4 homes. Maybe we can talk about that later. But we picked 4 homes across that period and started creating an essay film that kept discovering what are the different sorts of bodies that were supposed to be, that we were supposed to become. So while Nostalgia for the Future was really looking at and exploring who we were supposed to become, the next film, which Mukul and I made together, actually we made a film in the middle on an artist friend of ours called Squeeze Lime in Your Eye. So this is the third film we are making together. It was called Lovely Villa. And Lovely Villa is the name of the building in which I grew up, which happens to be in LIC colony, a Life Insurance Corporation colony in Borivali, northern Bombay. And that colony itself was designed by Charles Correa. And because I grew up in that colony, and that colony was imagined as a place where suburban citizens would live, suburban citizens who are living in Bombay would live. In that sense, it was also an idealized imagination. But I, of course, inhabited that idealized imagination. So as a corollary to Nostalgia for the Future, we decided to look at Lovely Villa more through intimacy. While the first was largely looking at imagination, the second was looking at the lived experience within an architecture. And in the second film, we were really looking at how lives of futures and of pasts haunt the spaces of buildings themselves. And how
why do you say haunt?
It's like that. Whenever you're designing a building, you're always designing for the apparition of somebody who's going to use it in the future, ghosts of the future, as it were. And when you look at and if you've lived in a place for a while and you see the corners where people have lived, then you see that corner is inhabited by the apparition of somebody who may not exist anymore. You remember the person through the space sometimes, right? So it was about that. It was looking at how our lives leave traces, intangible traces, within the architecture that we inhabit. So that was a Lovely Villa. So these were the 2 films that we have actually worked on together.
And was there any, it could have individual subtext, but what was the subtext you're trying to communicate? Because from my understanding, at least, since you're an architect, but you want to just transcend boundaries to probably film, then is it that's something which you wanted to manifest through architecture or through, say, other form of art? Why? What was the reason behind the film also?
So I felt that, as a teacher and as an architect, I very often believed, I was, wondering about what do we see as the role of architecture, and thinking about really what are the value systems through which one understands architecture itself. And as a teacher, I thought it was an important area to start looking at. And I felt very often that film as a medium could really allow you the possibilities to explore different ways of interrogating that question. For example, just as you're speaking of subtext in some sense. For Nostalgia for the Future, we were really interested in this, that idea that architecture imagines the bodies that are supposed to live in it. And what we did in Nostalgia for the Future is that we looked at that body across these 5, actually, I'll talk about the 5th later. 5 different sorts of imaginations of the body. So the first home that we looked at in Nostalgia for the Future was the Lakshmi Vilas Palace in Baroda, which was designed designed under the rule of Sayaji Rao III. Right? And over there, Sayaji Rao was really trying to imagine a new identity for this, for the Indian, which was a costumed identity. So it was an amalgamation of Indian elements and Western elements and all of these different elements that came together. He was trying to perform a new identity through the making of a home that could allow him that performance. Right? The second home is the classic Nehruvian/Corbusian home, which is the Shodhan Villa in Ahmedabad. And in that home, you see the sort of primitive sort of man, the way in which man is supposed to inhabit nature almost unmediated. So you're supposed to be kind of, in some sense, naked. So you discard the clothes and you're naked in nature. So under the sky, below the ground, like primal experience. The third home is the Gandhi ashram. And Gandhi, of course, did his famous experiments with truth, which were really experiments with his body. And there was a certain way in which he didn't trust the body, because the body gave pleasure and pain, and therefore had the possibility of not being true. So he discards the body and tries to attain a sort of spiritual emptiness. So there's the third stripping of the body. And the last home that we looked at is where even the spirit is seen as something that cannot be, enlisted to build the great Indian nation. So what we have is the body that is then becomes purely flesh. And then, the body becomes a machine that needs to be arranged in order and mathematically precisely mapped. That can then be enlisted to make the Indian nation. And that is the housing in Delhi that we look at, which is the refugee housing and the state-built housing colonies in the 50s and 60s. But across this whole story, one thing we realized is all of these imaginations come from a position of power, whether that's the state or that's trying to tell you that this is the way you're supposed to be. And none of us seem to be able to live up to those expectations. And our bodies never become those bodies. We are always in some way, there are many bodies that are left behind.
Correct.
So across the whole film, what you find are people who are staring at the camera. The camera itself is an instrument of power, right? Staring at the camera, wondering who is on the other side and who am I and what am I supposed to become for your gaze. And that is what we kind of end with at the end of the film when we go to Gurgaon.
Correct.
And we have that entire sequence of kind of those children staring at the camera. And we end the film in a sequence in Bombay with these women playing the drums underneath the residue of development, which is the space below a flyover. Now, so there's a narrative of that is sort of embedded in this, like a theoretical, I guess you want to call it, a narrative that we needed a way of conveying. And we felt film was a way that could ask questions without necessarily, a documentary film, and a particular kind of documentary film could ask questions without necessarily saying, this is the way you're supposed to think. Because I think it was a conscious decision for us to imagine a film that was a questioning kind of space rather than a
Essay karo type.
Essay karo type, exactly.
But anyways, from my understanding at least, society works from bottoms up, right? So it's very difficult for things to be structured from top down. So what was going on when you discovered that there were these 4 types of films which you captured, which tried to enforce a certain vision of the body of citizens from the top down?
So I don't think one works without the other. I think our identities are always oscillating between who we are and who we want to become, whether that's the top down or bottom up, right? If, for example, I want to, let's say I'm a big Rajnikant fan, okay? And that's my desire. And there is me. But how do I separate my being a Rajnikant fan from whom I am? So desire and my body are actually part of the same thing. And very often our desires are shaped from, to use your terminology, top down. Right? So I think that there is that sort of tension between who we are and who we want to be. And that is very often played out in the architecture and the images that we make to become who we want to be.
I need some time to comprehend this.
See, it's like that. It's when we make an architecture, we are not necessarily making it for who we are. When we are making an architecture, there is a way in which we are trying to become those people who are going to inhabit those spaces. Okay. Every act of architecture is an act of transformation of the self as well. Like every time we look at ourselves in the mirror, it's not only looking at who we are, we're also looking at who we want to become. Right? So when we make images, those images are actually desires that are getting played out about who we want to then become like. So that's the way that we were really conceiving of architecture in other words, as something that is not only about satisfying our more basic needs. We were looking at architecture as something that has a desire inbuilt within it.
Sorry, but in this case, you're trying to just perceive it differently, or the architect thought about it the same way also. I'll tell you why, because there's like a beautiful insight which I'm trying to decipher is because when I'm designing interfaces, or at least in the online world, whatever products have been designed, right from Steve Jobs till today, there's a certain level of thought process that I want to design for myself first. Like if I am happy, people like me will be happy. Is this the same concept drives in architecture? Because this is where the conflict is, right? An architect wants it certain way, like he's eco-friendly or he's making it much more sustainable, as opposed to understanding the user and then building it.
I think this is the classic sort of dichotomy of where we imagine that the designer is not human, and that the designer has separate sort of desires and aspirations, and the client, poor thing, okay, they don't know these things, and we have to then somehow lift them up to that level where they can then. And I think that really is a fallacy in actually the imagination of the profession itself. The profession has a responsibility to make lives better. That is primarily its job, right? And I don't think that one can kind of and of course there are certain skills that and certain value systems that determine its sort of role that it can play. But if that is something that lies in a complete cocoon with absolutely, if those imaginations lie in a complete cocoon with absolutely no empathy for whom it's building for, then the profession itself needs to be questioned, right? And if society as a large has created a profession called architecture to with a mandate to be able to understand what is spatially better, then society also needs to trust the architect to be able to, and they are trained to kind of do that. Then society needs to kind of trust the architect to be able to provide that sort of knowledge and information.
Interesting. So Rohan, I want to just slightly change tracks on the same lines only.
Sure.
Filmmaking, from my understanding, again, is like a much younger art form than architecture, right? So we daily walk past by the same building or like the same space in and around. And I don't think so we pay very acute attention to the deco, the flooring, the kind of wear and tear is happening with the architecture and stuff like that. So, and when the film captures this in a very elegant way, or like just still shots, or even like the one film which we saw with in Shantiniketan, there were just still shots, right? So it typically starts depicting something much more nuanced and refined. Now, is it like the architect's, what I can say is it the architect's failure? Is a wrong word, but yeah, is it the architect's failure to show those beauty spots, or is it the victory of the film as a medium itself to show them? I mean, to summarize this question, I would say, is invisible architecture great architecture?
So I think that one thing, that both of them are extremely different mediums, and both of them have their own strengths and possibilities. First of all, the question is, I mean, that's an interesting thing, because what is film? Film is an act of representation. It's an act through which we read the world and through which we are able to tell stories about the world. That's what it is, right? Yeah. And architecture is the spaces that we inhabit. So there's a kind of difference between that, the actual real spaces. There's no act of representation in architecture unless it is the drawing of architecture. So I think the interesting thing would be to think about space, okay, as something that we inhabit, all right, and architecture as the act of drawing that space for structuring it. Right? Because that's what architects do. They draw spaces, they represent spaces, really, and that's their kind of primary job. And then if one thinks about both the drawing and the film as actually modes of representation of space, okay, then I think one can think about how video can be used as a mode of telling stories of space as much as a drawing can. I know many sorts of architects who now are using video very, very proactively to understand places, to be able to represent places, and also as ways to tell stories about the possible futures that the clients are going to inhabit in the houses or the projects that they are going to be designing. So I think that's an important thing to kind of separate, that space and time are actually something that we are all trying to in many ways come to terms with. And both acts of architecture and acts of filmmaking are both ways in which we can intervene in making those spaces or telling stories about those spaces. Right. So I think that to compare them, one needs to be like little kind of careful about what exactly are the differences and the separations between each medium's possibilities.
And also, I believe architecture, again, as you mentioned, it's finally a drawing. But when it manifests into an actual building,
it is much more than just architecture. No, it is life. It is part of the world.
But what if you don't inhabit? Someone else is staying there. Like
but that's when you go about image making also. In the same thing as for the same truths as far as filmmaking lie as far as architecture is concerned. I don't inhabit an SRA building, but I need to understand it perhaps. Right? And acts of representation, drawing, film, etc. can help us understand it. So that when we are designing something in the future, we can try and do better than those horrific buildings that we are seeing right now in the city.
And yeah, I remember the point which I was trying to make is, like, since you mentioned about like the subtext which your films are trying to carry, right? Now that we are having this conversation, there are a lot of principles and philosophies which are abstract in nature. So do you see a way to make it much more relevant to the user, or you want them to be at that philosophical level and the people have to come to that and to understand?
When you say user, whom do you mean?
The audience. Like
the audience.
The audience.
This is the audience question.
Yes.
Right? It's a good question. It's something that we've been really thinking about. We've been thinking about the relationship of the work to its supposed audience.
Correct.
And one thing we feel is that audiences usually are much more agile and versatile and intelligent than... I mean, I like to believe that. I'd like to believe that I'm making a film such that it's a conversation between me and somebody else. Right? And if it's a conversation me and somebody else, I don't want to treat that other person that he's a fool or she's a fool. Right? This is fundamentally it. Because I find that a lot of documentary films sometimes presume that position, especially where they imagine that the role of the documentary is to inform. And the role of the documentary is to, let's say, agitate people into kind of saying something, doing something about things, right? And both those kinds of documentaries are valuable. I'm not saying that they're not valuable. Right? But I'm not interested in that kind of documentary because I think that if information has to be found out on, LIC Colony, it's not too difficult to find it. I'm more interested in using documentary, and Mukul and I both are really interested in using documentary as a medium through which we have a conversation with our audience, through which we evoke certain kinds of questions and ideas which may not be completely clear, because I don't think there's clarity as far as these things are concerned. I don't think I know better than my audience. Right? I know that there are things that we are all together in. Questions of modernity, questions of the role of us as middle class professionals. Those are questions, our own histories that within the contemporary moment that we all share, and these are things that we share. And there is no answer to that question. There's just the idea that between us, if we are able to have a conversation, then we can arrive upon certain ideas that can help us shape future action. So this is the way that I imagine the film's relationship with its audience. Right. Some of these ideas are forefronted, some of them are not, some of them are embedded, some of them are more meant as nuances that you may feel but not necessarily understand entirely, but you will get it in the future. I don't think when you're necessarily doing a work of art, right? If you are only going to be thinking about audience reception, Okay, and its ability to be clear. Ki, then I might as well be in advertising.
Correct. Or I was just recently reading about deductive art, right, where you just have to preach or have some moral value or some sort of communication to happen.
And I mean, that's great, good for them, and some great work that I've seen like that. But I don't think I have the ability or the sort of authority to be able to hold forth on saying that everybody needs to think like me.
So just like your representation, your perspective, your
it's a series of ideas that we are kind of presenting, ideas that we may share, ideas that you may be unfamiliar with. Okay. Some of which you will understand, some of which you won't, and some of which you'll get on the fifth watching, because that happens. The films are, Mukul likes to imagine that he has to be able to sit through his film in the sixth viewing without getting bored. So the film has to be layered enough so that we don't get bored. That is also true.
Correct. Wow, it's interesting. Then actually every screening needs to be followed by a conversation, right? Otherwise it's just...
We would prefer it that way. We really do prefer that. But whether the conversation is with us or whether the conversation is amongst an audience, I think is fine. I mean, I don't think we need to be there for the conversation to happen. Because I'm sure the films are provocative enough that people start saying something to each other. Maybe like, ye kya hai? Even if it is like, ye kya hai, mujhe samjha nahi. As long as it doesn't simply become kya hai, samjha nahi, therefore dismiss it, but try to think... But that is also about audiences, I think. I think nowadays what has happened is that we've become used to, because of the various ways in which we are bombarded by media, we've been used to becoming passive as participants in an artwork. We are used to having text describing what the work is. So we read the text and we don't necessarily see the work. Right? And we are used to most messages coming to us in easy to swallow pills. So we've become lazy in our engagement with work.
And I digging enough to understand what was the thought process.
Yeah, we don't how should I put it? We don't put ourselves out there and try and kind of engage with the work. I have that problem all the time when I'm showing films to my classes, right? And we try and show difficult films, films which are sometimes slow and long, etc. And you have to sit them down to tell them that it is your job also when you're watching a film. That it's your job to actively participate in the film. You are as much a part of making the film experience as much as the filmmaker has made that experience for you.
Very interesting. I should definitely come and attend one of the lectures. Now, coming to the films only, both of your films... have like long or steady shots. Like I couldn't understand, or I couldn't see any big camera movements or panning or zooming in, right? So was it intentional, or is it the standard norm for architectural films, or what was the thoughts
in the language of the filmmaking?
Yeah.
So
especially with the camera setting, right? Because I found a similar pattern with that other film which I forgot the name, Shantiniketan Vana, with so there are
Horizon.
Horizon. So again, so it's just like one shot maybe just ant moving, right? And it's moving in some direction, it's talking to the other ant, then it's going somewhere else. So is it... I mean, I don't know how to put it, but I'm just trying to make it relevant to the new generation, if I can.
Okay, so I'll tell you where the filmmaking languages came from for, to some extent, nostalgia as well as Lovely Villa. So with Nostalgia for the Future, especially, it's a film that is produced by Films Division India, and Films Division India has been making films for 60, 70 years that are making films that are shaping our identity. And we were interrogating that very same identity. So what we did with Nostalgia for the Future is that we referenced a lot of film languages that emerged from that time. Okay.
Which is more like Satyajit Ray and Kundan Shah
More
type.
films division films, because there are many.
These were, so they have also done like a lot of.
Yeah, but they did I'm talking about the more mainstream films division documentaries, which were made by the films division, within films division, by documentarians within films division, trying to, in some sense, talk about what the great Indian nation is, etc. So the choice of using a 16mm film was about that sense of time that you have within the texture of the film image itself. And evoking a certain kinds of past. But of course, because we are shooting contemporary life, to displace that image swaying, wo hai kya, right? Because you see guys using cell phones in 16mm films. And also the way that Mukul shot it was with this sort of particularly shaky camera, right? And shaky camera was so that you evoke this, it could possibly have been a home movie that was never made. By somebody just holding a camera and doing their own thing. So there was that sort of thing that began to kind of shape nostalgia for the future. And the other thing that we also started working with was that, when we have an image quality, every image quality evokes a time within it.
Correct.
Correct. Whether cell phone aaya, kuch aaya, wo aaya. And both in Nostalgia for the Future and in Lovely Villa, time is an essential part of the story. Right? Whether there's the evocation of the past or the evocations of futures. So what we did is that we used the filmic language itself, the image quality itself, to start breaking open time. So the time doesn't stay located in one place. The time is always shifting, and you're always wondering, ye black and white kyun hai? You know, and to evoke that sense of the many different times that we inhabit simultaneously. Because even in a Lovely Villa, if you're really interested in ghosts, ghosts are actually bodies out of time. They're not supposed to be there. They're supposed to have gone. Right? So to evoke them. So if you saw Lovely Villa, you remember all the footage of my father that comes in all these different sorts of textures and languages, or the older photographs that we use within the film. So that is the way that our filmic sort of image qualities emerged. We also used oral clues to start reminding people of times. So you have a particular kind of voiceover that is used, or you have music that references a collective oral memory, whether that's from Doordarshan or All India Radio or whatever.
That's Sunil Dutt.
Sunil Dutt, right? So all of those different tones of music start kind of displacing time within the filmic form, I guess. So that was one. So the way that the image and the sound worked was as far as that is concerned, right? Now, as far as the way in which one can... So that is one story. The other thing that we were very interested in is that we were really interested in getting an audience to break out of... sometimes when you're watching a film, you tend to step back. And you say, ye to chal raha hai, it's going on, and I'm sitting back and I'm passive as a participant within the watching of the film. Okay. But what we wanted to do is keep the people on edge a little bit. So what we decided to do is let the image break, if you want to call it. Let the seamless nature constantly sort of shatter. Okay. So sometimes what you see is that you see the people making the film within the film. Sometimes the smoothness of a narrative is broken with a sudden shake. And what happens with those breaks is as a person kind of begins to see the image as something that is not a given, but image itself as a construct. This is a made image. And once you see that it's a made image, then you start thinking about what is it? Why was this image made in the way that it was? And that's the way you begin to kind of participate in the story, or whatever, the narrative, if you want to call it that, of the film. You stop being passive and you start kind of getting... You
start to feel it being more real.
More real by making it more artificial. Because when you see it being made, you realize that the image is actually an image, it's not reality. Right? And then you realize that, so it's a more truthful image actually. You're presenting the image as an image.
So you're trying to stage the real.
Yeah, you're breaking the illusion of reality by showing that it is an image of reality. Right?
Yeah. I think for the listeners, they have to see it a couple of times.
Yeah, but you're understanding what I'm saying. So we decided to do that with the film as well. So constantly kind of break it and...
Back and forth,
break it a little bit. One thing that And the question, of course, that you asked is about time. And so the filmmaker Tarkovsky called film sculpting in time, I think. Right? So there's a way in which time itself becomes an object like marble. And the act of film is actually, that's in my head, that's the way I imagine that phrase, is actually shaping time like you would shape, like a sculptor would shape marble. So sometimes filmmakers do that. I guess they try and do that, looking at the way that different images and the times that are embedded within that are kind of come together to make a form.
I don't know whether I'm drawing the right connection, but I could see few of these shots, like I've seen in Godard's film, or like more recently Court, right? It is just like the last shot when everyone is walking out of the courtroom, right? It just there. You just show there, right? So what I understood is that when you're moving from one story to the other, there's like a complete blackout of few seconds, right? It's almost unbearable, right? Kya chal raha hai, matlab, is the film over or not? But what I thought is it's that moment for you to introspect. Was that the thought?
Exactly. Because you start introspecting, was ye ho kya raha hai? Because that's what happens. Then you realize ki why is the cut not here? Why is this scene extended in a strange way? Why is it out of
the traditional
norm?
Yeah.
And then you realize that it is a form. It's a formal choice. And that's why you're thinking now ki interrogation karna tha na, your introspection karna tha na. Yes.
Beautiful. There's like a lot more to talk about film, and like obviously you being a teacher have a lot more to share. But yeah, I would like to conclude with one last question. Is that I was researching about you and I wanted to know more about project Cinema City, and how does that tie up into your overall practice, and what are you looking forward from that project?
So within the Kamla Raheja College of Architecture, we have an organization that's called the Design Cell. Now, Design Cell works as a sort of interface between the academic space and the world outside. And the world outside, sometimes we work with government organizations, non-governmental organizations, other research organizations. And of course, as a institution that has been really interested in looking at us in the city, looking at different ways in which people are practicing within the city, we were and continue to be in touch with a wide variety of different artists, filmmakers within the city. There was a group like that was called Majlis. Majlis was the cultural wing was headed by the filmmaker Madhushri Datta. And Madhushri and we were kind of close, and she's come to the school many times, and she had this idea of doing a research project, multidisciplinary research art project, which was to examine the relationship between cinema and the city of Bombay. And that was the brief. So it was a long project. We started in 2009 and we did an exhibition, I think, in 2013 or something. It was a 4-5 year project. And through the project, we were really interested in examining, as architects, what that relationship can be. So what we did within the school, and the school was the architects within the team. They were filmmakers who made films. They were artists who did visual art. So it was a huge project, actually. All kind of, I guess, curated largely by Madhushri as the primary sort of person who was choreographing the whole affair. And because the project had a large architecture and urban section, the KRVA was an important partner within the project. So we were looking at what that relationship could be, and we thought of two ways in which we could imagine that relationship. One is looking at cinema pretty much as an industry. The spaces, and if you look at an industry, it's every product will have a place for pre-production, production, post-production, archiving, assembly. So what we did is that we studied the city of Bombay through the spaces that are within which film is produced. Like this would be one, because sound recording, dubbing, etc. might happen here. And we mapped these spaces in the city. That became one entire project.
Wow.
And the other one was looking at how spaces themselves are represented within films. So different ways, different versions of Dharavi in different films, for example, or different versions of Marine Drive, because Marine Drive is so many things. Marine Drive is the place that in Diwar, the mother comes with her sons. Diwar is the same place where Mithun Chakravarti is dancing. Is the same place where what's his name, Vivek Oberoi is riding his motorcycle. Is the same place. So it's all these Marine Drives exist in our collective memory. And when we are on Marine Drive as real people, we are actually within all these Marine Drives, because in our minds, the memories of those Marine Drives are getting played out in the very spaces, and ourselves themselves are playing out within those images. Right? So we did archives of these different ways in which different neighborhoods in the city have been imaged through cinema, and we did a study of simply the people and the places that are involved in the production of the film industry, both historically as well as in the different spaces that they inhabit. So this we started, and then this material then became part of different sorts of artworks. So filmmakers, artists, architects, they started using this material to start making installations. And then we had different exhibitions. The first one was at the National Center for the Performing Arts. And then there were many more that were held. One at the Berlinale, the Berlin Film Festival in 2010. And the whole thing ended with a big traveling exhibition, which started in Bombay at the National Gallery of Modern Art, and then went to Delhi, and then to Bangalore at the NGMAs. So that was the whole project. The whole project has come together as a book, which is it's a large fat book called Project Cinema City. So that's where that project effectively ended.
And sorry, where is it available?
It's available on Amazon, actually.
Amazon, okay.
Put Project Cinema City, you'll find the book.
Because I was going through the website and I couldn't understand that it has manifested into a book as such.
It's if you run a search for Project Cinema City on Amazon, the book is still available. So that was an interesting kind of project, because it was looking at really what is happening, because what has happened to cinema, like most industries within the city, is that it has been informalized. Large studios are reducing, large kind of shooting floors actually are, if you look at what's happening to Kamalistan, etc., they're all becoming housing colonies. But that doesn't mean that Bombay has stopped producing films. It's just that it has found new ways of producing films. And with the digital and with smaller spaces necessary, there's a new network through which industry, in this case film, continues to survive in the city. So it was an interesting way to get a glimpse into some of the forces that are shaping our cities today.
Interesting. And I'm just being very curious, but what triggers these inquiries? I mean, it's like what made you get into this inquiry also
of Cinema City? I guess because I'm an educator and I'm involved with urban design studios, I have a feeling that many times we presume things about a city that are not necessarily what really exists on the ground. We are trained as architects to think about categories like sustainability and whatever, and that usually is formulaic in nature. But there's very little investigation, rational, clear-eyed investigation of the term itself to think about what it really actually means. And as somebody who's interested in kind of teaching students, or even in some ways intervening in our cities, I felt that it was we feel that it's important to be able to understand these. And to be able to understand these, we need, because we are, I think we need to acknowledge the fact that our understandings of our urban environments are incomplete in nature. And if we presume to intervene
but
within
they'll always be incomplete, right?
They will be incomplete, but our incompleteness sometimes can be disastrous for the ways that we intervene within our cities. That we can presume certain truths and begin to kind of do these projects when the realities of our cities may be completely different and may lead to horrific outcomes which affect real people and real lives.
Yeah. And in fact, with the social media, the media narrative can be very misleading.
In any way. Yeah. So that's the thing. So which is why I think that urge to be able to discover as much as we can, and to be able to participate in the process of knowledge creation is, I think, what leads us to do these kinds of projects.
Yeah, I completely understand, because this is going to be like another podcast altogether episode, which is just trying to understand where do these things come from, right? Where do these because I had a interview with Ayaz also, and he's also inquiring about what the city is going to be in 2035, right? And I want to just understand where do these ideas come from, but sometime later. All right, I think this is a good note to end. It was really wonderful talking to you.
Thank you.
I wish we can have a 2-part series maybe sometime later.
Anytime.
And if people have to follow your work, contribute to the projects you're doing, any handles, social media?
Well, I am on Facebook as Rohan Shivkumar. I am on Instagram as an architect, Anarchy and Tech.
Yeah.
And come to the Kamla Raheja.
Super. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And that's it from today's Gyan session. Catch us on iTunes, Saavn, Stitcher or any podcasting app you use. Do rate us on iTunes and follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. Stay tuned for more Gyan on Audiogyan.com. Till then, bye.